They say a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. In my case, the lie was a velvet pillow, a comforting whisper meant to keep me still while the truth was a knife being sharpened in the next room. The lie was, "You're part of the family, Violetta." The truth was a termination letter and a patent application, both with my name conspicuously absent. My name is Violetta, and if you've ever had a job where you poured your soul into your work only to be told you were disposable, then you need to hear this. It helps to know I'm not screaming into the void. So if my story sounds familiar, if you've ever been the one building the ship while someone else was planning to name it after themselves and throw you overboard, let me know in the comments. And stick around because I'm going to tell you how I didn't just get a lifeboat. I took the entire fleet. The lie was delivered by Roman Lachlan, and he delivered it with the same effortless charm he used on everyone. He had the kind of polished, unearned confidence that comes from a life lived without consequences. His father, Arthur Lachlan, had been the heart of the Lachlan estate. Arthur had soil in his veins and a kindness that was as rare and precious as a perfect harvest. He saw something in me, a young, hungry vintner with wild ideas about viticulture. He gave me a corner of the estate, a shoestring budget, and his trust. For 5 years I worked under his mentorship, learning the soul of this land. But then Arthur got sick, a slow, cruel decline that took him from the vineyards he loved. Roman, his only son, stepped in. He had an MBA from a school that taught you how to read a balance sheet, but not a vine. He saw the estate not as a living legacy, but as a distressed asset. And it was distressed. Bad harvests, outdated techniques, and a market that had moved on had pushed the Lachlan estate to the brink of bankruptcy. While Roman was in boardrooms, schmoozing investors with PowerPoint presentations and promises of a modern rebrand, I was in the dirt. I was awake before the sun, my hands stained with earth and grape skin, my mind a frantic library of botany, genetics, and chemistry. I was crossbreeding, grafting, failing, and trying again. My life's work was culminating in a single desperate gamble, a new grape, a hybrid that was frost-resistant, disease-hardy, and produced a wine with a delicate ethereal blush and a complex flavor profile that hovered between a classic Pinot Noir and a bold Syrah. I called it the Solstice Blush. It was my Hail Mary, and I knew it was the only thing that could save Arthur's legacy. The first test batch was a revelation. Even Roman, who could barely tell a Merlot from a Malbec, knew it was special. His eyes, which usually held a look of bored calculation, lit up with a different kind of light, the unmistakable glow of greed. The investors who had been circling like vultures were suddenly believers. They tasted the Solstice Blush and saw dollar signs. A major distribution company, one of the biggest in the country, got wind of it. They wanted an exclusive deal. It was a multi-million-dollar contract that would not just save the estate, but catapult it into the stratosphere of the wine world. Throughout this whirlwind, Roman was my biggest cheerleader. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings, his hand resting on my shoulder a little too long. He'd tell me, "V, you've done it. You saved us." And then came the line, the one that I would later learn was the cornerstone of his entire deception. "You're not an employee, Violetta. You're family. When this deal goes through, your future is secure. We're all going to be very, very wealthy." I wanted to believe him. I was exhausted, running on fumes and the sheer thrill of seeing my creation succeed. I let myself be lulled by his words. I was family. The thought was a warm blanket on a cold night. It was also a cage I didn't realize I was being locked inside. The inciting incident, the moment the world fractured, wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, accidental discovery. The deal was set to be signed on a Friday. On the Wednesday before, I was in the main office, looking for some soil analysis reports I'd left on the old oak desk we all shared. Roman was on a call in his glass-walled office, pacing back and forth, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. I assumed he was talking to the distributors, finalizing the details. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but he had a voice that carried, a voice that demanded to be heard. I heard my name. Violetta? No, no, she's been great. A real workhorse. My stomach tightened. Workhorse. Not genius. Not partner. Workhorse. I paused, my hand hovering over the stack of papers. He laughed, a low, conspiratorial chuckle. Of course we'll handle the patent. My legal team is already on it. The Lachlan Solstice blush has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The air in my lungs turned to ice. Lachlan Solstice blush. He was stealing its name. He was stealing my name. And her? Oh, we'll give her a generous severance package. Make her sign a tight NDA. She's a bit of a purist, you know? Not really a fit for the global brand we're building. We need a new face for the marketing. Someone shinier. My heart didn't drop. It didn't pound. It just stopped. In that moment, it felt like the entire world went silent. All sound sucked into the vacuum that had just opened up in my chest. He was firing me. He was going to stand on the stage, built from my sweat and my sleepless nights, pop a cork on a bottle of my wine, and tell the world he had created it. And then he would throw me away like a spent grape skin. The lie wasn't a pillow anymore. It was a shroud. The walk back to my small cottage on the edge of the estate felt like wading through deep water. Every step was heavy, labored. The familiar scent of damp earth and fermenting grapes, a smell that had always been my comfort, now felt like the scene of a crime. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, the rough wood pressing into my spine. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the ringing in my ears, and the faint mocking sound of Roman's laughter, echoing in my memory. Then the dam broke. It wasn't a loud theatrical sob. It was a silent, gut-wrenching collapse. I slid down the door, and sat on the cold floor, my arms wrapped around my knees, as years of suppressed exhaustion and misplaced hope came crashing down on me. I had given everything to this place. I had sacrificed relationships, holidays, a personal life. I had poured my entire being into those vines, nurturing them like they were my own children. And for what? To be called a workhorse and discarded. To be replaced by someone shinier. The feeling wasn't just anger. It was a profound, hollow sense of foolishness. I had been so naive. I had mistaken Roman's slick corporate praise for genuine respect. I had mistaken his platitudes about family for a promise of belonging. The word echoed in my mind. Family. I thought back to his father, Arthur. He was the one who had made me feel like family. He would walk the rows with me, his gnarled hands gently touching a leaf, his eyes seeing things I was still learning to understand. He'd say, "Violetta, the land tells you what it needs. You just have to be quiet enough to listen." He saw the vintner in me, the artist, the scientist. He never once called me a workhorse. Roman saw an asset, a tool to be used and then put away. The memory of Arthur brought a fresh wave of grief, not just for the man, but for the dream he represented. A dream of a place built on passion and respect. A dream that his own son was about to bulldoze for profit. My gaze drifted around my small cottage. It was cluttered with books on genetics, soil charts taped to the walls, and petri dishes with vine cultures. This was my lab, my sanctuary, my prison. And then my eyes landed on a framed photograph on my cluttered desk. It was of me and Arthur, taken 5 years ago, on the day he hired me. We were standing in the very field where the solstice blush now grew, and he had his arm around my shoulder, a proud fatherly smile on his face. Next to it was an old note he had given me, with my first paycheck. It was written on a piece of Lachlan estate letterhead, in his shaky, elegant script. It said, "Violetta, never let anyone tell you the value of what you create. The creator holds the true power, always." I had kept it as a memento. Now it felt like a message from the past, a final piece of advice from my mentor. The creator holds the true power, and that's when the grief began to recede, replaced by something else. A cold, clear, and quiet fury. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage. It was a slow-burning, intensely focused energy. The sadness curdled into resolve. He thought I was a purist, sentimental. He thought I was a simple farmer who didn't understand the world of business, of legal maneuvering, of power. He had fatally underestimated me. He saw the dirt under my fingernails and missed the steel in my spine. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that, and I think a part of me believed it. It was about justice. It was about honoring Arthur's memory. It was about the principle that you do not get to steal a person's soul and call it a good business decision. I thought about another person who understood the rot at the core of the new Lachlan estate, Matteo. He was the cellar master, a man who had worked at the vineyard for 40 years, first with Arthur's father, then with Arthur, and now, grudgingly, for Roman. Matteo had seen it all. He was quiet, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his hands as calloused and stained as mine. He moved through the winery with a silent, almost spectral grace, a ghost of a more honorable time. He had never trusted Roman. I remember a conversation we'd had a few months after Arthur's passing. We were in the cool, damp air of the barrel room, the scent of aging oak and wine thick around us. Matteo was checking the bung on a barrel of Chardonnay. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His voice low. He said, "Be careful, Violetta. The old man, he built this place on trust. The son, he builds on contracts. And he only honors the ones that benefit him." At the time, I dismissed it as the cynicism of an old man resistant to change. Now his words were a prophecy. Matteo had seen the little erosions of the estate's soul. He'd seen Roman fire longtime field hands, men who knew the land intimately, and replace them with cheaper temporary labor. He saw the quality of the barrels decline, Roman opting for cheaper American oak over the French oak Arthur had insisted upon. These were small betrayals, death by 1,000 cuts, and Matteo had watched every single one. He was my only real ally, the only other person who loved the vineyard for what it was, not what it could be sold for. His loyalty wasn't to the Lachlan name anymore. It was to the land itself, and to the memory of the man who had treated him with dignity. That night, my despair transformed into a plan. It had been forming in the back of my mind for months, a half-conscious contingency born of a deep-seated unease I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Matteo's warning had been the seed. Roman's slick, condescending attitude had been the water. Now his betrayal was the sun, and my plan was about to bloom. It wasn't just about the grape, it was about everything. It was about the slow, painful realization that if you don't build your own shelter, you'll always be at the mercy of someone else's storm. And a storm was coming, but I was going to be the one holding the lightning. I stood up, the cold from the floor gone, replaced by a steady humming fire. I walked over to my desk, picked up Arthur's note, and read it one more time. The Creator holds the true power. Roman was about to learn that lesson. The hard way. And it wasn't about revenge, it was about a proper education. The world thinks genius is a lightning strike, a sudden brilliant flash. They're wrong. Genius, especially in my field, is the slow, patient, and often thankless process of building a lightning rod, piece by piece, hoping you've grounded it correctly before the storm hits. My lightning rod wasn't a grape, it was a fortress of paper, built with foresight and fueled by a growing sense of dread. Roman thought my world was confined to the soil and the vine. He had no idea I'd been spending my nights in a different kind of garden, one that grew on the fertile ground of corporate law and intellectual property rights. It had started almost a year ago. The solstice blush was just beginning to show its true potential. The first micro-vintages were extraordinary, and I knew, with the certainty of an artist who knows they've created a masterpiece, that this was it. But at the same time, I saw the changes in Roman. The more promising the grape became, the more possessive his language grew. It shifted from your project to our project, to in meetings with potential distributors, my new signature grape. He'd say it with a casual, charming laugh, as if it were a joke. But it wasn't. It was a test. He was floating the idea, seeing if I would push back. I didn't. I just smiled, a quiet, non-committal smile, and let him talk. My silence he mistook for acquiescence. It was actually observation. This is where the debatable logic comes in, where you might ask why I didn't just confront him then and there. Why didn't I demand credit or threaten to leave? The answer is complicated. Part of it was loyalty, a lingering, misplaced devotion to Arthur's memory. I felt a duty to save his legacy, and I feared that a confrontation would shatter the fragile peace and sink the entire estate. But another, more pragmatic part of me knew that a verbal promise was worthless. A fight with Roman would be my word against his. He was the owner, the name on the gate. I was just the help. To win, I couldn't just be right. I had to be bulletproof. So I made a choice that some might call weak, but I saw as strategic. I chose to play the long game. I let him believe he was in control. My first move was discreet. I took a significant portion of my savings, money I had painstakingly set aside from the modest salary Arthur had paid me, and I hired a lawyer, not a local country lawyer, but a specialist in intellectual property and patent law from the city. Her name was Evelyn Reed. She was sharp, no nonsense, and her eyes had the same look of intense focus I saw in the mirror every morning. In our first meeting, I laid it all out, the genetic markers of the hybrid, the years of research, the detailed logs of every cross-pollination attempt. I didn't just bring her a grape, I brought her a mountain of data. Evelyn listened patiently, her fingers steepled. When I was done, she looked at me and said, "The grape is your intellectual property, but ownership, in the eyes of the law, belongs to whoever files the paperwork. Your employer will almost certainly claim it was a work for hire. We need to prove this was created outside the scope of your standard duties, using your own time and resources." This is where most people would have been stopped. But I had been keeping meticulous records. I showed her my logs, time-stamped, detailing work done late at night, on weekends, in my own cottage, using specialized equipment I had purchased myself. I had invested my own money into this, a fact I had never disclosed to the Lachlan's. It was my secret hedge. Evelyn's advice was precise. First, we form a company, a limited liability company. It needed to be a clean, legal entity that could own the asset. We couldn't name it something obvious. No Violetta's Vines, or Solstice Wines. It needed to be invisible. A name that would mean nothing to anyone who might stumble across it. We settled on Vitas Veritas LLC. Vitas, the Latin for vine. Veritas, the Latin for truth. The vine of truth. It was my small, private act of defiance. I was the sole member. The address was a registered agent service in another state. To anyone looking, it was just another anonymous corporate shell. The second, more critical step was the patent. A plant patent. It's a specific, powerful, and often underutilized tool in agriculture. It grants the patent holder the exclusive right to asexually reproduce, sell, and use the plant they've created. To get one, you have to prove the new variety is distinct, uniform, and stable. My mountain of data was the key. Evelyn was impressed. She said, "Most inventors come to me with a great idea and a napkin sketch. You've come with the finished product and a 10,000-page instruction manual. Filing a plant patent isn't fast. This is the part that might sound implausible. A detail for the experts in the comments to debate. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office doesn't work on a vintner's timetable. It can take years. But you can file a provisional application, which establishes an early filing date. It's like planting a flag in the ground. That's what we did, over a year ago. It was my secret insurance policy. We then spent months compiling the formal application, detailed botanical descriptions, high-resolution photographs, and genetic sequencing data. We filed the full non-provisional application 7 months before that fateful phone call. Evelyn had been managing the correspondence with the patent examiner. She had warned me that the final decision could be a long way off. But in the world of bureaucracy, sometimes things move unexpectedly. During this time, my relationship with Matteo deepened. He became my silent co-conspirator. He knew something was happening, even if he didn't know the specifics. He saw me taking soil samples late at night. He saw the equipment I'd ordered arriving in unmarked boxes. He never asked questions. He just helped. If I needed to access the old irrigation logs from the 80s, the file would appear on my desk the next morning. If I needed to calibrate the refractometer without anyone from Roman's new management team noticing, Matteo would create a diversion, staging a minor, time-consuming crisis, with a pump on the other side of the winery. I remember one evening, we were in the grafting shed. I was working on a new batch of solstice blush cuttings, preparing them for planting in the main vineyard. Matteo was sharpening his pruning shears, the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel, filling the quiet space. He finally looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine. He said, "Arthur used to say that you plant a vine for your grandchildren. It's an act of faith in the future. I hope you're planting for the right future, Violetta." I met his gaze and gave him a small, reassuring nod. "I am, Matteo. I'm planting for a future we can all believe in." It was the closest I ever came to telling him the whole truth. He didn't need to know the details. He just needed to know I had a plan. His trust was a shield. It made me feel less alone in my silent rebellion. So, when I overheard Roman's call, when the initial shock and pain subsided, what was left was not panic. It was the quiet, calm click of the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. His betrayal was not the end of my story. It was the trigger for mine to begin. He thought he was writing the final chapter, but he had no idea I had already written the entire book, and the epilogue was going to be a masterpiece. That night, after the breakdown, after the wave of resolve washed over me, I did two things. First, I sent a coded email to Evelyn Reed. The subject line was weather report. The body of the email was a single sentence: "The storm is arriving Friday." She knew what it meant. It meant to have everything ready. It meant to prepare for war. Second, I walked through the cool night air to the barrel room. Matteo was there, as I knew he would be, doing his final rounds. He saw my face in the dim light, and the usual weariness in his expression was replaced by a sharp concern. I didn't have to say a word. He just nodded slowly. He asked one question. "Do you need anything?" I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said. "On Friday morning when the buyers arrive, I need you to make sure the main breaker for the bottling line trips at exactly 10:15 a.m. It needs to look like an accident, but it needs to be loud, and it needs to pull Roman out of that conference room for at least 5 minutes. Matteo's eyes, for the first time in years, held a flicker of a smile. He simply said, "The old wiring in this place is very unreliable. Consider it done." My secret plan was no longer just mine. I had an ally, a quiet, loyal soldier in the fight for the soul of the Lachlan estate. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming what was ours. The 2 days leading up to the signing were a masterclass in dissimulation. I went about my duties with a serene, almost beatific calm. I checked the vines, I tasted the developing wine from the tanks. I answered Roman's cheerful, condescending questions about fermentation temperatures. On the outside, I was the loyal workhorse, diligently preparing my own creation to be handed over. On the inside, I was a general preparing a battlefield. My calmness was my camouflage. It unnerved Roman. He expected tears or anger, or at the very least, a tense negotiation about my severance package. He didn't know how to read my quiet professionalism. He kept watching me, a slight frown creasing his brow, as if trying to solve a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces for. Thursday evening, the day before the signing, I received an email. It was from Evelyn. The subject line was Res Weather Report. The body was just as concise as mine had been. "The forecast is clear. All documents are prepared for landfall." Attached was a single password-protected PDF file. I opened it. There, in stark official typography, was the document from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. It was the official Notice of Allowance for Plant Patent Application Number 16/, followed by a string of digits. It stated that all claims had been found allowable, and the patent would be issued upon payment of the fee. Legally, the fight was over. The patent was mine. The date on the notice was from 2 days prior. Bureaucracy, it turned out, had a flair for the dramatic. I printed 3 copies on heavy, high-quality paper, one for the buyers, one for Roman, and one for me. Friday morning arrived, crisp and clear, a perfect autumn day in wine country. The kind of day that makes you believe in good things. I dressed carefully, not in my usual work clothes, but in a sharply tailored dark blazer, a simple silk blouse, and trousers. I looked less like a vintner and more like a lawyer. I put the printed patent documents into a slim, black leather portfolio. My heart wasn't pounding, it was steady, a slow, rhythmic drumbeat. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a transaction, a correction on a balance sheet that had been wrong for far too long. I walked to the main estate house. The buyers were already there, a team of 3 executives from the distribution company, looking sleek and expensive in their city suits. They were being schmoozed by Roman on the grand terrace, which overlooked the neat rows of my solstice blush vines, the leaves just beginning to turn gold. Roman was in his element, holding a glass of the wine, swirling it theatrically, his voice booming with false expertise. He was selling my soul, and he was enjoying it. He saw me approaching and gave me a wide, patronizing smile. "Ah, Violetta, the genius behind the Grape. Come, come, don't be shy." He wanted to present me as the humble artisan, the magical elf who toiled away in the background to make his success possible. I just smiled back, a calm, neutral smile. They moved into the large, wood-paneled conference room. The multi-million-dollar contract was laid out on the center of the massive oak table, looking like a sacred text. Roman sat at the head of the table, beaming. The lead buyer, a stern-looking man named Marcus Thorne, sat opposite him, his pen ready. I took a seat not at the far end of the table, as Roman had gestured, but in a chair directly to Thorne's right, placing my leather portfolio on the table in front of me. It was a small act of defiance, a shift in the room's geometry, that put me at the center of power, not on the periphery. Roman's smile flickered for a second, but he recovered quickly. "Well," he said, rubbing his hands together, "shall we make history?" Thorne nodded, uncapping his pen. They were about to sign. I let the silence stretch for a beat. Then, just as Thorne's pen was about to touch the paper, a loud, jarring clang echoed from the direction of the winery, followed by the distinct sound of winding down machinery. A cacophony of shouts followed. Roman shot up, his face a mask of annoyance. What in God's name was that? His new, incompetent plant manager burst into the room, face pale. "Mr. Lachlan, it's the main breaker for the bottling line. It's completely fried. There are sparks everywhere." Roman cursed under his breath, shooting an apologetic look at the buyers. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry. A minor technical issue. The joys of a historic property. Give me 5 minutes." He ran out of the room, the manager trailing behind him. Matteo had delivered. The stage was mine. I turned to Marcus Thorne. His face was unreadable, a mask of corporate impassivity, but his eyes were sharp, curious. He hadn't touched the contract. He was waiting. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice perfectly level, "before you sign that document, there is another one I believe you and your legal team will find highly relevant." I opened my portfolio and slid one of the documents across the polished table to him. He picked it up. His 2 colleagues leaned in to look. I watched his eyes scan the first page. I saw the slight widening, the flicker of surprise, and then the shift to intense, focused concentration. He read the entire document, all 3 pages, in complete silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. When he was finished, he placed it carefully back on the table and looked at me. A long, silent moment passed. He wasn't looking at me like I was a vintner anymore. He was looking at me like I was a principal in the deal. "Miss," he trailed off, looking at the patent for my name. "Violeta Reyes," I supplied. He nodded slowly. "Miss Reyes, this document appears to be a notice of allowance for a United States plant patent for the grape variety known as Solstice Blush, issued to Avitis Veritas LLC. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "That is correct," I said. His gaze was piercing. "And are you the principal of Avitis Veritas LLC? "I am the sole owner," I replied, my voice unwavering. He looked from the patent in his hand to the contract on the table, then back to me. A ghost of a smile, a flicker of professional respect, touched his lips. He understood immediately. He understood everything. The name on the contract was Lachlan Estate, but the name on the asset, the actual, legally protected, multi-million-dollar asset, was mine. He leaned back in his chair, a new calculation in his eyes. He wasn't annoyed, he was intrigued. This wasn't a problem for him. It was a clarification. He dealt in assets and legal rights, not family drama and empty promises. I had just handed him the single most important piece of due diligence in the entire negotiation. I had shown him who held the real power. At that moment, Roman burst back into the room, his face flushed, his hair slightly disheveled. "So sorry about that." "All handled. Idiots can't even flip a switch correctly. Now, where were we?" He picked up his own pen, ready to sign, a triumphant grin returning to his face. He hadn't noticed the document in front of Thorne. He hadn't noticed the shift in the room's atmosphere. He was a man walking into a room, completely unaware that the floor had been removed. Marcus Thorne didn't look at Roman. "He kept his eyes on me," he said. "Mr. Lachlan, I believe we have a significant issue with the ownership of the underlying intellectual property for this product." And with that one calm, clinical sentence, Roman's world began to crumble. Roman's face went through a rapid, fascinating series of transformations. First, confusion. He looked at Marcus Thorne, then at the document in Thorne's hand, a small frown forming. "Intellectual property? What are you talking about?" "It's our grape grown on our land." His voice was confident, but a thin crack of uncertainty was showing at the edges. Thorne didn't reply. He simply slid the patent document across the table toward Roman. I watched Roman pick it up. He scanned the first page, his eyes flicking back and forth. I saw the exact moment comprehension dawned. It wasn't a slow realization. It was a physical shock, as if he'd touched a live wire. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. His jaw went slack. He looked from the paper to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning, sickening horror. "Vitis Veritas LLC," he whispered. The words barely audible. "What is this?" "That," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, "is United States Plant Patent number 34789. It grants the owner, Vitis Veritas LLC, the exclusive right to grow, sell and use the hybrid grape variety, designated as Solstice Blush. As you can see, it was granted earlier this week." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words landed in the silent room, like stones dropped into a deep well. Roman's disbelief curdled into rage. He slammed the paper down on the table. "This is insane. It's fraudulent. You can't just patent something you made while working for me. It belongs to the estate. It belongs to me." His voice was rising, losing its polished boardroom tone, and becoming a raw, ugly shout. Marcus Thorne and his team watched this outburst, with the detached curiosity of biologists observing a creature in a cage. They were entirely unmoved. This was just noise. The document was the signal. Thorne finally spoke, his voice cutting through Roman's tirade. "Mr. Lachlan, our legal team is quite thorough. If this patent is valid, and it certainly appears to be, then the Lachlan estate does not own the asset we are intending to purchase. You are attempting to sell us a product to which you do not hold the exclusive rights. That is not just a problem. That is grounds for a lawsuit. The word lawsuit was a bucket of ice water. Roman flinched. He turned on me, his face twisted in a snarl of betrayal. The charming mask was gone, revealing the petulant, entitled man underneath. You did this behind my back. After everything we've done for you? I told you you were family. The hypocrisy was so breathtaking. It was almost beautiful. He was accusing me of the very betrayal he had been planning for me. You were going to fire me. Roman, I said softly. You were going to fire me. Steal my work, and patent it under your own name. I believe the term you used was Lachlan's solstice blush. You called me a workhorse that was no longer a fit for the brand. The blood drained from his face again. He had no idea I had overheard. He had assumed his treachery was a secret. He sputtered, trying to form a denial, but no words came out. He looked like a fish on a dock, gasping for air. He had been so sure of his power, of my powerlessness, that he had never considered the possibility that I might have a plan of my own. He had been playing checkers, moving his pieces around with arrogant confidence, while I had been setting up a chessboard in a different room, waiting for him to walk into a checkmate he couldn't even see. The desperation began to set in. He turned back to Thorn, his voice shifting from anger to a pleading, wheedling tone. Marcus, this is just a misunderstanding, an internal staffing issue. We can sort this out. We can buy her out. Name a price. Violetta, just name a price. We will make it worth your while. It was his last gambit. Money. He assumed that, like him, my loyalty and my principles had a price tag. This is a point of debatable character logic some might latch onto. A purely rational actor might have taken the buyout. It would have been a clean, profitable exit. But my decision wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about the principle. It was about the future of the vineyard. It was about Arthur's legacy and Matteo's quiet loyalty. To sell out now would be to validate Roman's entire worldview that everything and everyone is a commodity. I looked him in the eye. It's not for sale, Roman. Marcus Thorn finally intervened, his patience clearly exhausted. He stood up, a clear signal that the meeting was over. Gentlemen, our position is clear. Our company is interested in one thing, an exclusive distribution deal for the Solstice Blush wine. For that, we need a secure, legally defensible supply chain. The Lachlan estate currently provides the land and the facilities. Miss Reyes, he said, turning to me, his tone shifting to one of peer-to-peer respect, provides the grape. As it stands, there is no deal. He began to gather his things. Roman panicked. The multi-million-dollar lifeline was being pulled away. Wait, don't go. We can fix this. Thorn paused, his hand on his briefcase. He looked at me. The deal is not entirely off the table, I said, speaking directly to Thorn, ignoring Roman completely. The terms, however, will have to be redrafted. Thorn raised an eyebrow. Interested. Go on. Vitis Veritas LLC, as the patent holder, is prepared to enter into an exclusive licensing agreement with Lachlan Estate to grow the Solstice Blush grape. In return, Vitis Veritas will sign an exclusive distribution contract with your company for the finished wine. I paused, letting the new structure sink in. I was no longer an employee to be fired. I was a business partner, a licensor. The power had shifted, not with a bang, but with the quiet, rustling sound of legal documents. Roman stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was finally, truly understanding the depth of his miscalculation. He hadn't just lost the grape. He had lost control. He had been demoted in his own boardroom. The check for the multi-million-dollar deal would still be signed, but it wouldn't be written to him. It would be written to me. The silent takeover was complete. The immediate aftermath was a study in contrasts. Marcus Thorn and his team were models of efficiency. Their demeanor had shifted from that of prospective buyers to that of collaborators. They saw me not as an obstacle, but as the solution. The drama with Roman was irrelevant to them. The clarity of the patent was everything. Thorne gave me his direct number and said, "Miss Reyes, have your lawyer contact our general counsel. We'll get the new agreements drafted. We are very excited to be in business with you." With a crisp nod, they departed, leaving me alone in the conference room with the smoldering wreckage of Roman's ambition. He just stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty chair Thorne had vacated. The bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. The panic had subsided into a kind of numb shock. He finally turned to me, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Why?" It was a genuine question, full of a pain that was for the first time not performative. He truly didn't understand. In his world, what I had done was a betrayal of the highest order. In my world, it was a logical and necessary act of self-preservation. "You made this necessary, Roman," I told him, my voice devoid of malice. "You saw a workhorse. You should have seen a partner." I gathered my portfolio, leaving his copy of the patent on the table in front of him. I didn't need to say another word. I walked out of the conference room, leaving him alone with the consequences of his own choices. The news of the new arrangement rippled through the estate. My quiet legal maneuver had sent shockwaves through the foundations of the Lachlan power structure. I didn't poach anyone. I didn't need to. The best people, the ones who, like Matteo, had felt the slow decay of the estate's soul under Roman's leadership, saw what had happened. They saw that the power had shifted from a man who valued image to a woman who valued substance. Matteo was the first. He found me later that day, checking the temperature of a fermentation tank. He just stood beside me for a moment, then said, "The old man would have been proud, Violetta, very proud." It was the highest praise I could have received. Within a week the exodus began. The head of viticulture, a talented woman Roman had consistently ignored, submitted her resignation to the Lachlan HR department and sent me an email asking if Vitis Veritas was hiring. Two of the most experienced cellar hands did the same. They didn't want to work for a brand anymore. They wanted to work for a vintner. They were migrating, not to a competitor, but to the source of the quality they all respected. Roman, predictably, did not take this lying down. His desperation morphed into a clumsy, brutish counterattack. A few days later, I received a letter from a high-powered law firm representing the Lachlan estate. It was a cease and desist, filled with blustering threats of a lawsuit for intellectual property theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and a dozen other trumped-up charges. It was a scare tactic, a final desperate attempt to bully me into submission. It might have worked on someone else, but I had Evelyn. I forwarded the letter to her. Her response was a single beautiful sentence: "This is a tantrum in legalese. I will handle it." Evelyn's reply to them was a masterwork of polite surgical destruction. She calmly dismantled their every claim, citing my meticulous records, my personal investment, and of course the freshly issued, legally ironclad patent. She concluded by politely suggesting that any further baseless accusations would be met with a countersuit for tortious interference with Vitis Veritas's business contract with the distributor. The tantrum stopped. The Lachlan lawyers went silent. Roman's final pathetic move was to try and appeal to me directly. He called my cell phone. I almost didn't answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. His voice was completely different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a strained, pleading tone. He offered me everything he had previously denied me: a massive salary, a vice president title, a share of the profits. He even offered a public apology. He was offering me the very promotion he was planning to deny me, now that I held all the cards. It was a classic desperate counteroffer, and it revealed that he had learned nothing. He still thought this could be solved by throwing money and titles at it. "It's too late for that, Roman," I said calmly. "You had a chance to build a partnership, based on respect. You chose to build one on lies instead. Now you have to live with the foundation you laid." I hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke. The final confrontation wasn't a confrontation at all. It was a simple business meeting. A week later, my lawyer, Evelyn, and I met with the Lachlan Estates legal team to finalize the licensing agreement. Roman was there, but he was a ghost at the table. He was flanked by 2 other board members, older, stern-faced men who were clearly relatives or longtime family associates. They had been brought in to manage the fallout. Roman said nothing during the entire meeting. He just sat there, looking at the tabletop, his face a grim, stony mask. The terms were simple. Vitis Veritas LLC granted the Lachlan estate a 10-year, exclusive license to cultivate the Solstice Blush grape on their designated acreage. In exchange, the estate would pay my company a significant royalty on every bottle of wine produced from those grapes. Furthermore, the final wine product had to meet a strict set of quality standards overseen by me, or a representative of my choosing. I was now, effectively, the quality control for my own creation, with the power to reject any batch that didn't meet my standards. I had not taken over his company. I had done something more elegant. I had made his company dependent on mine for its single most valuable product. As the lawyers were making final notations, I looked across the table at Roman. I thought of all the things I could say. I could have thrown his words back in his face. I could have gloated. But I didn't. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rectifying an imbalance. I remembered something Arthur Lachlan used to say to me when we were walking the vines. He'd say, "The vine doesn't care about your name, Violetta. It only cares about your hands. It knows who tends to it and who just talks about it." I leaned forward slightly and spoke, my voice low enough that only he and the board members next to him could hear. "The vine knows who tends to it, Roman." He flinched, a flicker of pain in his eyes. He knew his father's words. It was the only blow I landed, and it was the only one that mattered. He had been given a legacy and had tried to steal its future. Now he was left with nothing but the empty name. 2 weeks later, Matteo told me the news. The Lachlan Estate Board had held an emergency meeting. Roman was removed as CEO. He was given a meaningless title and a seat in a remote office, effectively exiled. His own family, the people he claimed to represent, had seen his incompetence and greed for what it was. He had gambled their legacy on a lie, and he had lost. His removal wasn't my doing. It was a consequence. He wasn't destroyed by my ambition, but by his own lack of character. The system, in its own slow corporate way, had corrected itself. My new reality began to take shape. I used the initial influx of cash from the distribution deal to formally establish Vitis Veritas as a viticultural consultancy and intellectual property management firm. I leased a small, clean, modern office space in town. Matteo became my first employee as head of operations. The talented people who had left the estate came to work with me. We weren't a massive company, but we were a team of experts. We were a company built on the one thing Roman never understood: genuine, earned respect. My first major client was, ironically, the Lachlan estate. The new CEO, one of the stern-faced uncles from the board meeting, hired my firm to oversee the cultivation of the Solstice Blush. I was now being paid handsomely to do the very job I had once done out of passion and loyalty. The only difference was that now the name on the door, the name on the contract, and the name on the check were all mine. I was no longer a workhorse. I was the sovereign power in my own professional life. The balance had been restored. In the end, it really wasn't about the money. It was about this. I'm sitting in my new office. It's clean, filled with light, and on the wall opposite my desk is a large framed document. It's not a motivational poster or a piece of corporate art. It's plant patent 34,789. It's a symbol. It's a testament to the idea that the Creator holds the true power. It's a reminder that your work, your ideas, your very soul have a value that no one is allowed to take from you. My name, Violetta Reyes, is on the patent. My company's name, Vitis Veritas, is on the door. My signature is on a multi-million-dollar contract that secures not just my future, but the future of the team I've built around me. This is what vindication looks like. It's not the loud explosion of revenge, it's the quiet, steady hum of a well-run machine that you built yourself. So I'm speaking to you now, to everyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. To every person who has built something beautiful, only to watch someone else put their name on it. Your talent is not a gift you give away for free. Your loyalty is not a chain to be used against you. And your value is not determined by the person who signs your paycheck. It is inherent in the work you do and the integrity with which you do it. Do not wait for them to recognize your worth. Recognize it yourself. Document it. Protect it. Build a fortress around it, not of anger, but of preparation, because there will come a day when you will need it. And when that day comes, you won't need to shout, you won't need to fight. You will simply present the truth, and the truth will do the work for you. My story is not about grapes and vineyards. It's about owning your contribution to the world. So if this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the undervalued architect of someone else's success, please, like this video. It tells the algorithm that stories of quiet strength matter. Leave a comment and share your own experience, because our collective stories are a source of power. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because this isn't just a story, it's a community for everyone who has decided to stop waiting for a seat at the table and has started building their own. Thank you for listening.